Hey Photo World, welcome back to another episode here on TakeandTalkPics.com. This is another episode from the former podcast. Please subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join the email list. Let's get to that 1,000 subscriber marker so that way I can add a new video every single week. Enjoy.
Hey Photo World, Rob Kruger here, TakeandTalkPics.com. Starting Monday, June 1st, there will be a small change to the podcast format that we have. Don't worry, Wednesday and Fridays are going to stay the same, delivering great information and telling the story and journey of photographers from around the world. But those Monday episodes are going to be the different ones. I'm going to talk to you on a more private setting, where I dive a little bit deeper into a past episode, at least a portion of it, and discuss my thoughts on things that came up. Be sure to tune in Monday, June 1st, where those changes will begin. But for now, have a happy Friday, and enjoy this episode. Hey Photo World, Rob Kruger here with Take and Talk Pics. This is episode 27 featuring Skip Cohen.
My passion is the marketing and business side. Now, if I have to shoot, I can, and I enjoy it, but my profile as a photographer really is more like a serious hobbyist.
Today's featured guest is Skip Cohen. Skip is the president and founder of Skip Cohen University. His approach to education in business, marketing, social media, and networking influences the ability to thrive, not just survive, in one's own photography business. SCU is a radical difference from your typical educational options. The site alone has a rich saturation of information through their blog, videos, multiple podcast options to listen to, and the Skip Cohen University community at large. Skip, welcome to Take and Talk Pics.
Hey, Rob. Thank you.
Absolutely. I've shared a little bit about you, just scratching the surface. Can you introduce yourself further to Photo World and share a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, if I can ever figure out what I do. It's the hardest thing. My dad is 92, and he'll try and say, now tell me again what you do. Because he's at a point in his life where, every time he sends me an email, he calls me to see if I got it. It's sort of like, Pop, you missed the point. But my background, I started at Polaroid in 1970, essentially washing bottles in the lab, $2.89 an hour, and that's my roots. I had always loved photography. I'd been active. I was in the camera club in high school, had been working in a dark room for the local newspaper, which back in those days, the only issue you needed to worry about was that the mayor or town commissioner or anybody of authority was in focus. It was all black and white. You'd print the image up in the dark room and then throw it on an engraver. And it was a fun after school kind of job. Started at Polaroid in like 1970, spent 17 outstanding years there. I loved Polaroid. It was a great company then. In fact, at its peak, there were 23,000 employees, and it's hard to believe that they eventually wound up, bankrupt and out of business. And there are a whole bunch of lessons there that'll show up in Harvard case studies for years to come. Got a cold call one day from a headhunter who wanted to know if I knew anybody that wanted to be president of a small camera company. At that point, I was the specialty dealer manager for Polaroid. So my channel of business was made up of all the camera stores. So anybody, if you were a camera store, regardless of what products you carried, you were under my umbrella with Polaroid's business. And I really went to hang up on the call because I thought it was my brother-in-law screwing around. I used a couple of obscenities, told him to kiss my tush and I'll see you at Ma's for dinner later. And as I'm hanging up the phone, this guy is yelling, no, this is legitimate. The job turned out to be president of Hasselblad USA. Wow. Which represented the next 12 years of my life. That was absolutely amazing. And then I got a call one day, or actually two guys came in to visit me in the office who the internet was exploding. That was around 99. And they were looking for somebody to be president of an internet company that was a startup. The whole idea was to build a photographic community and then have a retail store that people could visit. The company was called photoalley.com. We got up to around, I don't know, 30 million plus in sales. But at that point, could never get into the black. And fortunately for me, it wasn't my fault. It was interesting. I was president of this internet company, and Jim O'Neill, one of the finest buyers in the country, was my partner in that, along with a customer service staff and some other people in New Jersey. And we were essentially the front office. So we were dealing with all the manufacturers. And in turn, the office in San Francisco had all the developers and the two owners who pretty much kept the books. And we went off to PMA, I think it was 2001 PMA, and they announced to us that we were disappearing. We were being sold to Ritz, who were essentially just buying our inventory. And Photo Alley was essentially going to disappear, and we were without a job. My accountant yelled at me and said, at least go collect your unemployment. If you don't, I will. And I found myself for a few months, in the unemployment line trying to decide what I wanted to do next. And that's where Rangefinder Magazine and WPPI came in. And the common denominator there was I had been very close with the owner of the company going back to my Hasselblad days. And he made me an offer, said, come on and be president, run the company for me. And I want to move on to some other things. I'll be chairman of the board and I'll stay out of your hair. And I was there for 7 years, at which time in 2009, I just decided it is really time for me to go off and see if everything I've learned about life and this entrepreneurial spirit that I so admire in you and all of your counterparts, being independent business owners as professional photographers. And I just decided it's time to see if I had learned anything over the previous 30 plus years.
Right.
So in 2009, I started Marketing Essentials International, which is really it's my company and it's the umbrella for things that I like to do. We did some things with charity with the Akron children, it was called the Akron Photo Series, where all the proceeds went back to Akron Children's Hospital. I had a blog at that point called Skip's Photo Network. I was just getting involved in Facebook and a little bit in Twitter. We launched Skip's Summer School that first year, and that later morphed into Skip Cohen University, which now, while we don't have an active summer program, it's a lot more fun being active in somebody else's program. So I'm a regular speaker at Shutterfest, for example, and I write for Shutter Magazine. I also write for Resource Magazine, and I just have a blast doing the things I'm doing. And that's kind of where I am. I didn't mean to drag that out, but
no, not at all.
There's the background.
It's this kind of moment where it's a big wow. And I hope Photo World out there is hearing this and realizing you didn't wake up and just start Skip Cohen University, the things you're on today, and just land these roles. You've been on this marathon, this, trek, one thing after another, seeing where life takes you. And like you said, see what you've learned and see what you can get out of that. So I think it's nice proof and pays homage to the stuff you've had behind you, all the Polaroid years and Hasselblad, things of that nature that have led you to this point. So that should be inspiring for Photo World, hopefully. It's definitely inspiring to me. But to keep the inspiration flowing, Skip, do you have a quote or mantra that you live by or run your business by?
Oh my God. Well, this is proof, everybody. This is unrehearsed. I have not been sent any list of questions. No, I guess I have a mantra. I don't have a quote. There are a ton of quotes out there that I love, and thanks to Twitter, I typically do one tweet at 7 in the morning or 7:30 or so, and I do another one at 4:30 because there's so much wisdom out there, and they're all in the form of 140 characters or less one-liners, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Every now and then you get a long one, and then it becomes a blog post for me. But in terms of my mantra, I guess there are two components. One is, and this is, I don't mean it to sound in the shape of in the form of a device either, but you really can't appreciate winning unless you've lost a few. And I know my wife, Sheila, hates the word failure. And she also hates it when I should on myself. And, you're sitting there saying, and yeah, I am playing on the word should.
Right.
You sit there and you say, you know what I should have done? It's like, don't should on yourself. And when you've failed a couple times. I mean, I was every parent's nightmare. I was thrown out of college my junior year. I was on academic suspension twice before then. It wasn't because I wasn't smart. It's because I was lazy. It's because I had a lot more fun playing pinball for beers at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, which has nothing. But at that particular year, Miami got Playboy magazines. They were the #1 highest consumption per capita of beer in the United States. And it was, I went off to drink and party and did everything that I shouldn't have done until I was forced to grow up. But being thrown out of school, you suddenly are faced with, all right, now what do I do? And I eventually went back to school nights and did the things I needed to do to get the background that I needed to have for today. But when you've lost a few, and I remember reading an article, there was a Harvard case study out at the time about a business owner who only hired people that had failed, mostly college dropouts, because he found that their work ethic was that much stronger. They were that more determined to prove themselves. And because they had lost a few and had a few scars, they appreciated winning. They appreciated loyalty that much more. So that's one side of my mantra is if you get wrapped up in everything that didn't work. In fact, there's a great quote by Thomas Edison that said, "I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 things that didn't work."
Right.
And that's so true. And then the other thing in terms of the mantra and the way I live my life today, if you're not waking up smiling, then you really haven't found success yet. And everybody has a different definition. In fact, I did a podcast with Sandy Putsch that we wound up calling Defining Success, because she was very open about taking her business all the way up to $1.5 million, and then her stay-at-home husband wanted a divorce, and suddenly she found herself with business disappearing and taking a bath in the darkroom sink in her studio, and being essentially homeless, and turning all that around to be happy today, to be a driving force behind SPTV, to be, in fact, she's on the road right now with what she promises is going to be her last road show. But you have to define success, and you have to sit back and say, all right, money is a nice thing, and having that big boat or the fast car or whatever it is that's material out there, but you got to wake up every morning smiling. And it drives Sheila nuts, because the minute the sun's out, daylight starts, between 6:45 and 7:15, I'm probably going to be at my computer starting to launch some tweets and blogs and look at what things I've got scheduled for that day. I've got, 7 to 10 different companies that are involved in the project now, and it's all about education. There are no short answers to these questions, so I apologize.
No, it's okay. I think it's a good way of getting information from a different angle, because you don't really consider yourself a photographer. You know a ton about it. You know more of the business, and I love the word you use, entrepreneurial side of things. Because with this teaching and podcast, I kind of view myself more as an entrepreneur with it rather than a photographer, because I don't want it to be about my photography. It's about the journey and getting out to photo world. But when you talk about having a smile on your face in the morning when you get up, I think we all as photographers start with that. We love taking pictures. We have this passion for it. We think it's fun. And we start out that way, and then we realize there's a whole business side to this. And that's the balance that throws things off, where that smile doesn't show up as often, because there's a lot more that goes into building what your photography as a career is.
Well, here's one of the things that they do wrong. There's a great line about so often people give up when they're on the 1 yard line and so close to realizing their dreams. And there's another great line that says, before you quit, remember what kept you in the game in the first place. And put those two quotes together. And so often I see photographers that just fail to recognize that they're approaching burnout. And it can happen to somebody that's only been in the business 90 days. It can happen to somebody that's been in the business 9 years. It doesn't make any difference. You've got to recognize the importance of establishing your priority. You've got to recognize that if you're married, man, you better work in date night now and then. You've got to spend time with your family. You've got to find those opportunities where you can walk away from the business. And it's much easier said than done. And God knows how many mistakes that I made where I just didn't pick up on all of that and didn't realize that, whoa, I'm about to crash and burn. So you need to recognize, you need to look in the mirror every morning and make sure the face in the mirror is smiling back at you. And if it's not, this is also where your network comes in. There's so many photographers that are afraid to ask for help.
Right.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've done a blog post and said, listen, if you're stuck, here's my email address. I'll get one, I'll get two people. Wouldn't bother me a bit if my mailbox was absolutely on overflow. I might have to do things differently in the way I offer to help people, but there's so many people out there that are willing to help and so many opportunities. And if photographers would just bury their pride a little bit now and then and stop thinking that they've got to do it all themselves, what a difference. You'd be amazed. And I know you mentioned that somewhere along the line, you had caught up to me in one of the forums. I mean, there are at least 3 that I have part ownership in. And I know in all 3 of the forums that the whole idea is, how can we help photographers? How can everybody help each other raise the bar?
You said it earlier about like failure moment and how your wife doesn't like hearing the word failure. But you said also you've learned from so many different things. Can you bring us to one story, one time, Skip, where it didn't work out as planned, it didn't go the way you thought it would, and it was a nice learning moment that you can look back on and grow from that?
Oh, there've been a bunch of them. Let's go to what I would consider my first one in business. I mean, I was hourly at Polaroid. I had a shot at a supervisory job. I was told by the hiring supervisor in the microscopy lab that the job was mine. And I laugh today because the guy that actually got it, he and I have stayed in touch on LinkedIn, and every now and then we catch up to each other because it was so traumatic. I was told the job was mine. So this was my big break, going from an hourly job to salary and to becoming a frontline supervisor. Somebody came out of the woodwork within that department, and I got a call from the supervisor who had said she was the manager, who said the previous day she was going to be announcing my name in the morning. And this guy, Jack, got it, and I didn't. And I was crushed. I mean, I remember going home practically in tears because at that point I had been with Polaroid for, probably 4 years and didn't want to stay in research, wanted to be more in a people capacity. And I look back on it now, and that's one of those opportunities that had it not been for that, I would have taken other steps. I also got caught in a layoff. I was actually caught in 2 layoffs, and what saved me was the fact that I was in personnel and issued my own layoff notice. And at that point, if you were on salary but had been hourly, you had bumping rights based on seniority. And I bumped into a customer service job where I had enough seniority to hang on to it. That led to a supervisory job in the camera repair group, which led me to a job in Chicago, which grew into a regional manager's job, which brought me back to Polaroid corporately years later, supporting the international group, and I became the international manager for customer service. So I was spending 3 weeks home and 2 weeks overseas for 2.5 years, got to see the entire world, almost the entire world, thanks to Polaroid. And also at that time, there was no internet. You were allowed to make 1 call a week home, and everything that you knew about business and whatever confidence you had, if it wasn't in your briefcase or your head, you were dead meat. You're going off to, I'd be in Germany, I'd be France, I'd be in Spain, Italy. I'd be expected to have the answers. That was a hell of a training ground. And that in turn led to the U.S. job, which in turn led to, the president of Hasselblad position, because Hasselblad was looking for somebody that knew their network, and Hasselblads were only sold through specialty dealers. And that was my channel of trade. So, there's a great line from Tennyson that goes, I am part of all that I've met. And boy, that couldn't be truer for me, for you, for all of us. We just don't realize those things that happen in our lives that at the time we think are traumatic. And the reality is, and I've seen it too many times, here's a mantra of mine: everything always works out for the better. I don't care what it is or how miserable you might be, in the long run, somewhere down the line, and I'm going to go 99% of the time, you're going to be able to look back and say, wow, that made me better, stronger. It gave me some direction over something new or something different that had come into my life.
Exactly. And it starts with those moments where, it didn't work out and you go home almost in tears. But if you take that opportunity, Photo World, to not turn it around, because it's okay to be alive, but to look at it a little bit differently and understand, okay, it may not be the time. It may not be that opportunity. This may not have been the right thing. And then the next stage will come. And it's easier looking back. It always is. But when you do look back, you're going to be like, that was an interesting moment because it was devastating then, but I would not have any way of getting where I am now without that moment having happened, and you can attribute it to that. So I think it's really wonderful looking back. It's tough going through things for sure, but it's wonderful looking back and seeing the changes and the growth that we make as photographers, as business owners, on a base level, as people in the world.
Well, I just did a blog post recently on looking back and saying the title of it was "It's Okay to Look Back." The point being that you can't really know where you're going unless you pay attention now and then to where you came from. Mm-hmm. And looking back can sometimes be an outrageously great exercise, especially when you go back. And if you look at some of the first images you may have photographed at a wedding, for example, or you go back to a video from one of your early weddings, and then you take a look at it and you start to see things that you missed. You see moments in the video that you're going, oh, wow, I should have been paying more attention to grandma, or, I should have shot with a longer lens, because you love to get that narrow depth of field and just be able to focus in on the tear in dad's eyes or the bride or whatever. So,
Skip, to change a little bit and get more into that business side, and I know this is a big focus you have here for us to share. We have a wide range of photographers listening. Could you share with Photo World one thing that you think would lead to growth and success in a photography business, regardless of their current level today?
Yeah, right off the bat, get active in your community.
Boom.
Get people. It's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. And being active in your community and giving back to your community, to me, is one of the absolute pillars. It's a key foundation block in terms of building your business and your reputation. Being involved in the community. I mean, there's a great, I can't think of his name, J. Conrad Levinson, who wrote and actually coined the words guerrilla marketing, and is the father of guerrilla marketing, and today is probably in his 80s. I heard him speak years ago, and he talked about in the top 100 things that guerrilla marketers need to do is to give back to their community, because people like buying products from companies they perceive as giving back. And that is so important. So you want to start to build your business and your reputation in your community. It's appropriate to give back. The other thing is, as you're building your business, number one, make sure you have the skills to back it up. This is not a fake it till you make it business. Yes, there are a handful of well-known photographers that started out with great marketing, but for 99%, as that number again, of the photographers out there, you need to have a skill set that's unmatched. If you're doing everything the way everybody else does, if all your images look like Uncle Harry could have gotten them because Uncle Harry's got the same gear that you have, or has got better gear than you have because you can't afford it yet, you've got to make your work stand out. You've got to look at everything that's going on in your community and figure out what's not being done. And then that's the thing you need to focus on. So there are two little tidbits.
Yeah, I have to admit something because I'm having a little guilty conscience right now. Just 2 days ago from this episode today here, I used the phrase, fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it is appropriate when you want to talk about confidence. Fake it till you make it is not appropriate when you're going off to shoot a wedding and a couple has put all of their confidence in you to create a stellar album, and I don't know, your flash system dies. I photographed 2 weddings in my life, both of them assisting Dennis Reggie, and both of them were Kennedy weddings. And at the second one, it was 95 degrees, 90% humidity, and Dennis's Met strobe wasn't working. It was misfiring all over the place. It turned out the problem was condensation in the connection going in and out of air conditioning and back out into the humidity. It wasn't any fault of the gear. It wasn't his fault. He had Hasselblad on the front end for the camera. He had a Met strobe, but that SCA 390 adapter in the middle was essentially shorting out. And Dennis went to manual and shot the whole wedding and never missed a beat. You know, that's where you can't fake it till you make it, because you've got a client that has trusted you. Now, in portrait work, I suppose it's easier to fake it, because if you screwed up, you can keep shooting and bring the client back in. If I go back to the film days, you couldn't fake anything, because if the film came back from the lab and the negatives were too thin, you just missed all your exposures and they were all over the place, then, you know, that's where everybody started blaming the lab. You know, I'm really sorry, but we had a problem at the lab. And, you know, there are an awful lot of photographers over the years that had to rely on indemnification insurance to make sure that they were covered.
Okay, so it's getting some clarity, because there's everything it's all relative, right? I mean, so there's faking it till you make it in certain aspects, but you can't just pretend you're a photographer, rent all the high-end gear, show up, and that means you know what you're going to do. So
it is not about your gear.
Yeah, it's not, well, none of those things, and we'll probably get to that in a few here. I'm going to back it up a little bit. There was one other nugget that I loved, because I've never heard it this way before, and it's eye-opening. It's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. I think that's a fantastic way of understanding networking and the idea of service, and not so much that I'm going to get in this network and I'm going to meet all these great people and then everything's going to come towards me and my life is going to be changed and it's going to be amazing. It's I'm going to get in here and see what I can offer to the network, to the community. How can I contribute my talents, my knowledge? How can I be a part of it? Or just on Facebook groups, you know, writing constructive criticism, you know, for people, just to help out with what you know, or that debate opens up for people where they come back and kind of might fight you on that viewpoint. But it's just being involved in the community in that way instead of just a greedy approach. So I really liked that little turn at the end of it's not about who you know, it's who knows you. It's just a really beautiful thing to hear it that way.
Yeah. The old definition of a network used to be your Rolodex. And we all had business cards and Rolodex files. In fact, there was an episode not too long ago. I love the TV show Chicago PD. And Trudy at the front desk there is going through her file, her Rolodex. And one of the younger cops says, "What's that?" And she said, "It's the Rolodex." And, you know, she's got business cards in there. And that's the way we used to track our network. But I've written a few blog posts about the care and feeding of your network, because, you know, going off to a convention, the number one reason, as far as I'm concerned, that everybody needs to go right off the bat is building your network. Yes, it's educational about new things you might take in some of the classes. And yes, you want to meet every vendor who's involved in any product you use to run your business. All of that is important, as well as seeing new products. But it is about building your network. It is about developing relationships with people. It is about going into a program that's got a great keynote speaker and making it a point to talk to the person on your left, the person on your right, the person in front of you, and the person behind you. Just to be able to say, "Hey, you know, how are you guys doing? Here's what I do." And the reason for that is that everybody has the same challenges. They just happen at different times. And you may have a challenge in Chicago, Rob, that you're trying to deal with, and not realize that the guy sitting next to you from LA just went through that same thing 6 months ago. And being able to open your network. And that's why I love to encourage people. You've got a couple of great groups in Chicago where you're based that get together on a regular basis and do monthly meetings and bring in speakers. That's all part of being involved in your community. It's all about being involved. And the care and feeding of your network means staying in touch and doing more than just collecting business cards, and finding people that you bring into your network and you in turn join theirs, who complement each other's short suits, so that you may not be the strongest children and family photographer, but as a wedding photographer, you don't ever want to say just flat out no to anybody.
Right.
So if you're not going to develop the expertise yourself, when that bride calls you a couple years later and says, "Hey, we're starting a family, you know, do you guys, you know, do you handle you do any children, family photography? And if you do it, that's great. But if you don't want to say no. You want to be able to say, well, I don't, but I've got this buddy who does a great job and I'd love to introduce you to him. And then you start doing referrals back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely. Skip, I don't want to get too fixated on the idea that there's only one aha moment in a career, but I do believe there are multiple, and I kind of want to view them as more of turning points, things that changed. It was a dramatic difference in your business or your approach that kind of stood out. Can you bring us to a time and tell a little story about that aha moment where once that light bulb went off, that's when things started to shift and move in a different direction for you?
Well, let's take Skip Cohen University.
Mm-hmm.
My co-author on a book called GoingPro is Scott Bourne, who's now retired. And I learned a lot. Scott had the 104th website in the world and was just remarkable in terms of understanding the internet and, seeing what was coming. He really was and is a futurist. And I remember Scott at one point, at that point I was doing Skip Summer School, and I'd have 10 sponsors that would pay X amount to have a table there and be part of the event. And then I was writing a blog, and I'd have a few sponsors that would get involved there. And then I was writing for a few different magazines. I was consulting at the time for a couple of different companies and marketing and business. And I remember Scott saying to me, what do you think would happen if you stopped screwing around with all these little nickel dime projects and just focused all your energy into one thing? And that one thing became Skip Cohen University. And I remember Sheila finding me. This is not a pretty sight, but Sheila found me standing, naked in my office. I've got a big whiteboard, and I woke up out of a sound sleep and was smart enough to at least close the blinds and sat there with this marker. And I literally had taken a lot of times I'll talk about cocktail napkins, because we'll all be out somewhere, and especially at a convention, you start talking with somebody, you get an idea and you start scribbling things down on a cocktail napkin. Mm-hmm. Well, I've got this giant whiteboard, and I remember filling up my whiteboard with different components of what could become Skip Cohen University. And I don't want to make it sound like it's, the be all and end all. I'm still growing. I'm amazed at the end of every day how much I still have to learn. But there are so many photographers, for example, that get bogged down with, oh my God, look how much I have to learn. It's like I want to grab them by the throats and just say, wait a minute, give yourself a pat on the back for how much you've learned so far. In any event, that was an aha moment that led to Skip Cohen University. That also got me. I mean, I love doing live programs, but it's labor intensive, and it's a lot more fun being part of Sal Sincata's world and Shutterfest, for example, or speaking at one of the other conventions and not having the labor-intensive headache of worrying about the attrition clause at the hotel, the issues, all the things that I dealt with over 7 years as president of WPPI. Mm-hmm. So that was an aha moment.
All good stuff. And yes, Photo World, get a whiteboard. There's nothing wrong with a little handwritten notes coming out of your mind,
Well, for me, it's the only way I can remember them. I know that there are a dozen different programs, and I have friends that have tried to get me into a number of the internet programs that run your calendar, that remind you when you've got a task to do. For me, at this point, and maybe this is one trick that you can't teach an old dog like me. I like my whiteboard. I like being able to write it out. I like being able to, when I physically write it out, I remember it better. Even though I type like 80, 90 words a minute, it's not the same as writing something out longhand.
Right. I mean, we get these little apps like Evernote. I use that pretty frequently.
Yeah, Evernote. Evernote is one of the ones that a number of people have tried to get me into.
The problem is I don't go back. I'll write the notes and then I don't go back and read them. A whiteboard, you see it in your office, you see it in your garage, wherever you have it, you see it every day. You're confronted with that knowledge.
Here's a trick I just learned from Brian Caparici, who's the founder of sproutingphotographer.com. He's covered his new office in whiteboard material. And what's cool is that if you buy and it's some kind of a plastic, if you buy the shower liners that they make for shower stalls.
Mm-hmm.
You can use a dry marker on those. And he's gone ahead and bought that kind of stuff and I'm assuming it probably comes in 4 by 8 foot sheets. It's a fraction of the cost of a whiteboard, and it just goes up flush on the wall, and suddenly you've got all the benefits of a whiteboard without investing in the frame piece that you've got to hang. You just glue this stuff right on the wall.
That's pretty cool. Skip, during your career so far, what is the best advice you've heard?
Oh, there were 2 pieces. When I took the job as president of Hasselblad, a good friend of mine said, just take the first 3 months and listen. Don't jump in and think you know the business. Learn it first and just listen to all your employees. That was one. And the other piece was my first senior manager's job as I was growing up at Polaroid. And the comment was made to me, handle every piece of paper once. Now, we don't do a lot of business in paper in this industry anymore, but the same applies to your email.
Mm-hmm.
You know, read your email, make a decision on it, decide what you're going to do. If it is one that requires that you've got to do a little research before you say yes or no on a particular question that's come up, then flag it. But those two pieces of advice have been absolutely stellar. Oh, and the other one was from my dad, who said, never hire anybody who tells you they know everything about the job, because then you can't teach them the way you want them to learn the job. So there are 3 pieces.
A lot of great nuggets there. And with that first one, Photo World, congratulations. You're here, you're listening. That's a great start. So I really appreciate that coming up for a podcast especially. The next one, kind of throw that in other directions too. I just a little sneak peek, Photo World. I haven't made any official announcement, but I'm writing a book that revolves around that idea with your images, that there has to be an ending point. You can't keep retouching. You can't keep editing. You can't keep pretending there's something to fix. You have to get it out there. So the book is based on that idea that, you know, moving forward is the drive, and getting your work out there is the process. So
well, go back a second more, because you hit on something, and I feel like I'm interrupting you all the time.
Oh no, it's fine.
We're both feeding off each other's ideas here. Where the issue of retouching.
Yeah.
Just want to remind everybody, if it's a bad image, it's a bad image. And unless your name is John Paul Caponegro or Eddie Tapp or Julianne Cost, give it up. You're not going to turn it into a work of art. If it's a bad image, it's a bad image. And I've been quoted a few times. It wasn't my line, but my line is you can't buff a turd. If it's a bad image, give it up already. And it's funny because at one point I used that, and somebody sent me an email of Mythbusters where they proved that you could buff a turd. So even that doesn't really hold up.
Well, I mean, it just comes back down to get it right in camera. You know, learn your gear.
Got it.
Learn your eye. Get it right in camera, you know? As a recommendation for those who are beginning their careers, because we have a range of people. I feel like the majority of our listeners are kind of the middle of the road professional who they've been making their business for a few years, but now they've hit a plateau and they don't know what to do next. But we all kind of look back at what we should have done differently, and there's no better time to start making those changes than now. So I look at this as an idea as the starting point of a business. If you had to start a photography business today, what is the first thing you would do to get that going?
Well, the first thing is my skill set. I'd make sure that I knew every aspect of my camera gear. I would be sleeping with the stuff. I would know every single button on it. I would have, you don't need to get into a lot of equipment. And what a lot of photographers forget is that if there's something exotic that you need, stop worrying about tying up your cash flow and just go rent it. In fact, there are companies like Adorama. They've got a rental program where you can rent and apply what your rental fee is towards the purchase price if you really want it.
Yeah,
so
that's cool.
My skill set would be first. The second piece would be defining what I want to do with that skill set. And maybe that really has to come first. There's so much going on in the industry today. You cannot be everything to everybody. There are some photographers that do it extremely well, and you can eventually be a portrait artist and a wedding photographer and a baby photographer and a commercial tabletop shooter, if that's what you want to do. But you've got to take it one step at a time and truly develop the skill set around that. The next piece, I guess the first is defining what it is you want to do with that camera. The second piece is getting to know the camera and the lighting and the gear. I mean, I'm so frustrated with people that'll say to me, well, I'm a natural light photographer.
How do we hear that
is
all the
such
time?
bullshit, because the reality is you're a natural light photographer because you're afraid of learning studio lighting.
Right.
And Michael Corsentino, who is a great photographer and really understands lighting, told me once that he used to be one of those people, and then he just decided to sit down one day, and each day he challenged himself to do a self-portrait a little bit differently, setting up his lights differently and doing different things. And practice only makes perfect if you're practicing it right, which explains why my golf game is so horrible. You've got to practice, you've got to do it right. And I mean, it's actually a Roberto Valenzuela line about practice doesn't make perfect. What if you're doing it wrong? Only perfect practice makes it perfect. So that becomes a piece. Next comes making sure that you understand your market. There are photographers out there that are so misguided. And I'll give you an example. If I had a desire to be a children's photographer or a baby photographer, the last place in the world that I would open up business would be Bay Harbor Island, where my grandparents lived outside of Miami when I was a kid, where the average age was probably 85. You want to look at your community. You want to pay attention to what's going on in the community. Photographers forget about their demographics. For example, 98% of the purchase decisions to hire a photographer in the portrait social categories are made by women. And I see women make the same mistake where they want their website to look very high tech. Well, the reality is that if your target audience are women, then you want your website to be a little more feminine, to be a little softer in the colors. You don't have to have everything on the website being black and silver or black and gold and very high tech looking, as opposed to more social and a little softer looking, because your target audience is mom. I mean, Rob, how many times have you had a male contact you to photograph a wedding or a portrait session?
With 200 plus weddings, I think there's been maybe 2. I don't know.
Okay,
there
so
it is.
Few. Well, that's pretty much the way it is for everybody. Dad is on board to pay the bills. But the decision to hire a photographer and the person that's going to recognize the need for an updated family portrait is going to be mom or the bride, or mom and the bride, if you're on the wedding side of the business.
Right.
So you need to pay attention to your demographics. And then I would start to get the word out, build a portfolio. People forget that, your portfolio needs to be images that you've created. I can't stand it when I see photographers shooting over the shoulder of an instructor thinking that they're going to load their portfolio up with images that they can never reproduce. That's a good example of not being able to fake it till you made it. Because if you can't reproduce the images that are in your portfolio, then you're setting yourself up to be a disappointment. And any moron can get their first customer. Right. The key is getting the first customer to tell their friends and the first customer to come back, and then getting, number 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on.
Value bombs all over the place here, Photo World. So
well, I'm just loaded with value bombs because there are no short answers on any of these.
Well, and the information doesn't end here. So I mean, you have Skip Cohen University, which is an amazing resource. But do you have any other app or internet resource that you would recommend to Photo World that they could benefit from knowing about?
Well, I happen to love some of the different forums on Facebook. I'm involved in Facebook Wedding Photographers, and I co-anchor that with Chris Fawkes from Australia and Brian Malloy from Boston and Steffi Smith from the Atlanta area. There's some great questions and things that come up there. I happen to love the Shutterfest forum, which I've mentioned a few times here. There are also forums like WPPI and Professional Photographers of America, even though it's not the PPA site. There are some huge groups out there that are available. There are also local guild in almost every major city, and a lot of smaller ones too. You have camera clubs. You've got professional groups that get together. You've always got the option of starting one on your own. so that you've got a way to get a monthly exchange. A PPA has got their affiliates, which I enjoy because their affiliates are very independent and they're not necessarily aligned with some of the things that PPA does that I don't totally agree with all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And those affiliates also give you an opportunity to be a part of a group that gets together. And then I always recommend everybody attend every possible workshop that comes your way, especially hands-on. One of the frustrations I have is photographers that think that they can learn everything watching videos. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of SPTV that I'm a co-host in, and Creative Live and Kelby One,
right,
and Shutter Network. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there that's going online, but you can no more become a great photographer watching only videos than you could learn to drive a car watching only videos. You got to get behind the wheel. You've got to get out there with your camera. I love photographers that are doing 365 projects where they're doing a different image every single day. And whether they share it or not doesn't matter. What is exciting is that they're forcing themselves to go shoot something outside their core business or their day job that's different, that's challenging them.
Right. And when
so that becomes important.
Absolutely. And when it's outside of your job, the part you've chosen as your business, that's a great opportunity to practice new things, to play a little bit. So you're not practicing on the job, because there's nothing more of a waste of time than to not get the shots you know you're capable of and wasting that time practicing on something that may or may not work. It's not worth the risk. So go add and double down on that possibility, photo world. Go out and learn, go out and try, go out and play, and then bring that with you. Add those tools to your box and go into the next job that much more educated.
Yeah. And they're also, by the way, YouTube is a great learning tool. As much as I'm saying, don't rely just online, but go into YouTube in the search box, put in any of the icons in photography, and odds are you'll come up with dozens of videos that they've done and created that are online. And they may be 3, 4, 5 years outdated, but that doesn't mean that the lesson that they were sharing at the time in that video is outdated. You've also got a number of great blogs. Almost every photographer these days has a blog. Some of them do a much better job than others. There are educational series that are going on all the time. You've got sproutingphotographer.com that I enjoy and I get involved in on stuff that they're doing, and there are a lot of us that share a lot of different content. So it's out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few really big ones. We had Lee Morris from F-Stoppers, this past week. We had Jim Harmer from Improve Photography and Jared Poland of Fro Knows Photo. So, I mean, there are big sites out there. I mean, a Google search, YouTube search, like you said, there's just tons of stuff out there. There's no reason to only be stuck at your computer, but you can get it from anywhere, and you can attend these workshops. You can attend these seminars.
Yeah.
So,
and finding a good blog to follow is like whatever magazine or newspapers you like to read.
Right.
It does become very personal. But what I always recommend to everybody is give it a chance. Don't go into just one blog post and say, oh, I don't agree with this, or I don't like this guy. Look at what they're talking about. Look at all the issues that they've got there. You've also got some great blogs with the manufacturers. I do have a business relationship with ProPhoto, but there's some great content that we've been pulling off there. Marathon Press just launched a new blog. I mean, every day there are new blogs and new programs. Tamron has got some great educational pieces out there. Mm-hmm. So, test them all out. Look at the gear you have, and look at all the manufacturers that are represented in your camera bag, in your studio, and get to know some of the people at all of those companies. And that's going to lead you to more educational resources. So there's a lot out there.
Yeah, there is. Skip, I'm going to admit a little something to you, because I didn't send you questions ahead of time, as I do with most people I interview. Most of the questions I've gone over are kind of off the cuff. We're just kind of going through the conversation. So this is a different episode for Photo World than they're used to, which I hope they're enjoying. I am. I really love this conversation, the back and forth we're having. But before we go, the last couple things, could you share with Photo World one parting piece of guidance, and then the best way that we can reach you?
Yeah, listen to your heart. learn to believe in yourself. If I have learned nothing else from my wife, Sheila, and this is my second marriage, it's believing in yourself. I know when I was deciding to leave Rangefinder and WPPI, I cannot begin to tell you the fear I had. And I remember her saying to me, "What are you afraid of?" And my answer was, "I'm afraid of failing." It's believing in yourself. It's learning to listen to your heart. It's building a very small network of one or two people that you are closest to confide in and lean on and work together to build something. So and I could do another half hour just on believing in yourself and listening to your heart. And in terms of where to find me, skipcohenuniversity.com. They're always, every day, there are typically anywhere from 3 to 5 posts going up. I typically write one of my own every day, but then there are different videos and pieces that come up from the companies that are involved. I'm also Skip Cohen on Facebook and Skip Cohen on Twitter, and I'm desperately trying to learn and decide whether or not, Google Plus and Instagram and Pinterest are all, do I really need to be involved, or am I really hitting the market that I want to hit? Because my target audience is very different from yours, Rob. My target audience is you and all of your associates out there as photographers. So I sort of know where to find all of you, whether it's in the different forums on Facebook or at various conventions or
Right.
whatever. But there are every day you wake up and there's something new. It's sort of like when I finally figured out how to program the DVR, it was obsolete. I'm also, by the way, the low-tech poster child for the photographic industry. There are really a number of manufacturers that I've suggested that their tagline should be, "Hey, if Skip can do it, you can." And it's very true. There's some really exciting things going on in photography right now that I absolutely adore. And I'm shooting with a Panasonic mirrorless Lumix system that has totally revitalized my love for actually shooting, even though I've never been a formal photographer. And it's being able to get that energy out there. And I want to remind people that, God, if I could figure it out, just think what you'll do knowing how to actually apply this to the quality of an image. So
Exactly.
That's it.
Well, Skip, I cannot thank you enough for your time today and sharing such great value. Photo World thanks you, and happy shooting.
Thank you.
Photo World, are you looking for a way to make your images pop to that next level? Head to takeandtalkpics.com, go to the affiliates page, and from there you will see Free Vault photography products. We have worked out a special deal with Free Vault photography products, so you can get 15% off your next purchase. Just enter Take and Talk 15. Spell it out, Take and Talk, then the number 15. Hey Photo World, thank you so much for tuning in today with our featured guest. Be sure to tune in next time where we feature another photographer and telling their journey. Happy shooting!